pulling meat out of the fridge and crossing the railroad tracks. So classic. Just kidding. Obviously it's fake. But the point is, my style has changed when it comes to reviewing games. And this one, though, this game is pretty special because Great Western Trail First Edition was one of the ones in the old days of how I used to do my reviews. I would put cameras in freezers or on top of refrigerators a la Good Eats, right? That was my inspiration. I would go and film on railroad tracks because I wanted to just make sure you got that pop. And then I realized, hey, that's dangerous and stupid and it might break my camera equipment. Plus, also, the simplicity of me telling you my thoughts really kind of started evolving and coming forward. Now, eventually I will go back to doing some of those crazier camera shots. See my Twilight Struggle versus 1969 versus 1960 review. Did a full Kodak scene with Roy Campbell and Solid Snake. Fun stuff, right? I'll never quit that completely. But this is why I bring this up. In the 400, 500 videos that I've done here on the Dice Tower over the last 6 years, this is the first time that I've seen a first edition game be hot and popular and come out as I'm playing and get the game and love the game and review it and give it rave reviews, and then be here long enough and around long enough to do the second edition of the game as it comes out. Now I know that's happened. I've played a ton of second editions of first editions, but never when the first one came out when I was there to get my hands on it and then getting my hands on the second edition. This is the first time this has happened, so it's pretty exciting. So enough talking for the intro, been long enough. Let's look at the game, second edition of Great Western Trail, and we'll come back up to talk final thoughts. So this is second edition Great Western Trail set up for 4 players. Now there's only 2 on the board for clarity of seeing it, but all of the setup is done for 4 players. That would include things like the certain amount of workers in this slot over here, as well as a couple other things as far as the amount of cattle in the cattle market, just so you know what's going on. You're going to place all of the buildings that are generic, and that would be these tan color ones that are one side, on the tan spaces. Now you can match the color, or you can match the letter, or eventually you can shuffle them up until you put them out in any order you want, which kind of varies the game a little bit. Let me just get you a little bit more of the flare out here because it's kind of hard to see when you have it zoomed all the way out. A couple of different areas to look at on the board. These are building spaces that you're going to be able to build your buildings on. We're going to talk about those in a minute, these building spaces, as well as anytime you see the icon. If they have a tree, one of your personal buildings keys off trees. These are hazard areas down here. So you've got 3 different hazard areas. You've got the river or water, you've got the desert over here, and then up top, up there, you've got the mountains where it's treacherous to get through. Those are places in which you will have to pay based on player amount. The hand is worth different amounts of money. So the green hands in a 4-player game are worth 1 coin. The black hand here is worth 2. So as you move through the game, you would have to step on each one, 2, 1, 1, 1 coins that you would have to pay if you choose to go that direction. Now you can remove these hazards and you'll get to keep the victory points for them. It's a bit of a point salad game, just to note before we really look at the components. As far as how you score at the end of the game, a couple of things to look at. Every 5 coins is worth 1 point. Every one of your buildings that you build has a certain point value. There are point values associated when you make deliveries, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There are point values when it comes to being the station masters. Again, we'll talk about that. Those hazards we just talked about. The actual cattle numbers. Each of the cattle has a victory point on it that's not your base starting cattle, because you'll start with cattle. We'll talk about in a minute. Then you also have these gold cards. You will all start with a gold card, which are cards like this. You need a level 3 cattle, a level 4 cattle, and then you need to have one of your buildings out. Easy to do. The other gold cards are going to cost, though, if you don't meet them. So this one's worth 5 points, but if you don't meet it, it's worth -3. When you play it out of your hand into play, you get to move your train for 2 spaces. You then also have the Station Master tokens, which we talked about a minute ago. The actual tokens themselves. Those tokens that are on the board, you see them up there, the blue tokens right over there. Those give you bonuses at the end of the game, as well as victory points for things on your player board down here, as well as if you've built or if you've recruited enough of these workers, they're going to give you victory points as well. And then last but not least, the first person, or the person that kicks the game out to the end game, will gain victory points of 2. Now let's look at the area here for your player board and talk about what happens on your player board. So this is your personal player area. Now, essentially, you've got a couple things to look at. Your player board with these tokens on it that you're going to move off the board to make your actions better. You've got all of your buildings that you're going to be able to recruit onto the board or build onto the board. And then you've got your hand of starter cattle, 1s and 2s. They're all different types as well. So you've got a couple of Galloways, a couple St. Gertrudis, a couple Piney Woods. And why that matters is you're going to be trying to sell these cattle for a profit at the end of the round or so. And when I say round, they are amorphous because they change depending on how many buildings are out there and how far you choose to go. A couple of other things. You can move 4 spaces. These can all be upgraded to where you can move 6 or you can move 7 spaces. You have a hand limit of 4 cards, which you will always draw back up to the end of the turn, can be raised to 5 and then 6. Now those matter because when you are selling cattle, if you were to have, for instance, at the end of the round, let's say this is our hand of 4 cattle here. This is not 2, 4, 6, 8. It's 2, 4, 6 because these 2 Galloways cancel out having a third, so it only counts the type of cow. So 2, 4, 6. So you're going to want to get multiple types of cattle out there that you can get points off of. These auxiliary actions are things that you can do during the game if you're not choosing to take the main action or some of the buildings on the board. For instance, this one will tell you to take a double auxiliary action, and these would be these actions here. Take a coin, draw a card from your personal deck, and then discard one to the discard pile of your personal discard. This is back your train up for a coin in order to move your certificate. Now, the certificate means that at the end when you're selling cattle, let's say our value is 8, I could then spend this, boom, to make it 9. You could actually spend it from 3 to make it 9, 10, 11 if I wanted to. You can also open these up to get more slots here. These are going to open up more abilities to get 2 coins because you can't do the same action twice, but if you do this, you can do this action and that action. This one is spend a coin to move your train forward, and then spend a coin, move your train backwards to completely remove a cattle out of your hand. The reason that's important is because you're going to get some cattle in there that you just want to get rid of because they're not that great. They don't do anything for you except actually kind of hurt. Not hurt, but they just gum up your hand to where they're useless. The different buildings that you can build here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in order here. We're playing on the A side. There is a B side where the buildings are different, but they do all sorts of different actions. So it is a worker movement, not necessarily worker placement, but worker movement game. But as you go, you're going to want to step on these actions to take them. Here's the cool part. Your action spaces, the ones with the red border, the other players have their color, can only be used by you. If you step on them, you get to take the action that's there. If someone else steps on them, they can only do a single auxiliary action. That also goes for if they step onto a hazard or step onto an outlaw space. But that is what happens with these actions here. Now they do all sorts of various things, letting you go to the market, hiring, recruiting people, building buildings, moving your trains forwards. The point of these is to make your game better and better without having to rely on those generic buildings out there. Now let's go to the main board and kind of talk about the flow of the game. So as the game starts, you're going to pick one of the generic spaces to start at. You don't start here, you pick one of these. So let's just say we start here. Now as you're moving, we can move 4 base. You do not count these that have nothing in them. You only count them if they have something in them. So if we were to go this way, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and we would end up on that space, having to then pay all this. However, if we went this way, it would be 1, and we could stop there if we want, or we could go further. This is move your cube down, your certificate or ribbon cube, and then take a gold card if you want it, and then move your train forward for 1 space. You're going to keep moving up through the place. Couple things to note: some of them will be run off an outlaw, which is, this used to be trading with the natives, so it's essentially you're getting their bounty for taking them in, which is actually a little bit more thematic. I do miss the whole trading with the natives. I thought that was cool because it really showed a picture of the West and how it worked. But also, this was definitely in the Wild West. You're hunting down bad guys, which Bash Reeves was the best at that. Look him up. One of the greatest historical figures ever. So you then have these kind of places here. You have the hazards. You have the buildings you can go to. One other thing, if you choose to build your building just after a hazard, you're going to get a bonus for doing this kind of more dangerous route. Then you're going to travel all the way up. And I don't want to belabor that too much because all the actions are there. You can hire workers based on their cost. So this is a 6 and a 6 for this row. What's cool is, let's see, where's that action? This one here. So the action is hire a worker at the base cost of the row. Now you can also sell cattle. A lot of the actions have sell cattle for a profit. This one is pay the cost of the row for a worker. You can do it again by adding 2 to the cost. So we could technically get one for 6 and then another for 8 as it stands right now. These workers would then go onto your board here, and as you have more workers, the more benefits you get for having those workers. For instance, the more cowboys you have, the better you can do in the cattle auction. The more builders you have, the better buildings you can build. The more engineers you have, the faster your train can move. Let's talk about why that train is important. As you get to Kansas City in the end, you'll notice the track up there with the different cities and the numbers up top. So Fulton and St. Louis and Bloomington and Peoria, excuse me, I can't read from here, Peoria and Chicago. Blazing Peoria. What you're going to do is we're going to get all the way up to Kansas City. You're going to do the first 3 steps, which we'll talk about in a minute. Then you're going to sell your cattle. Let's just say we have a 9 value for our sales of cattle. We then could take one of these cubes or one of these discs off our mat here and then put it out here covering one of the discs up here. So let's just say we did 9. So then we could do anything 9 or less. So Peoria has an 8. Now there's a problem. The reason you want to move your train is for twofold. One, every X between your train and where you chose to deliver costs you money. The other reason you're going to want to move your train is as you move along, you can pull off into these substations, drop off a disc here into these places, and then put one of your workers that you've collected from here. Now you already have one painted on your board, so you can't get rid of those, but one of the ones you've recruited onto these spaces here, enabling you to take this benefit as well as get the points at the end of the game for these. And those will go up all the way to the end here where they're worth quite a lot of points. Now those are important because they're worth points and you're also freeing up more spaces on your board. Notice up there though, some of the spaces have shoulders. We call them black shoulders and some have white shoulders. That matters based on your player board here too. The discs you can get rid of have black shoulders and white shoulders. You could not get rid of this disc here if you've chosen to deliver to a black shoulder place. Then you're going to keep playing. Now the steps you're going to hit as you hit Kansas City are as follows. Number 1, you're going to take one of the level 1 tokens here and put it on the board, either a hazard or an outlaw. Number 2, you're going to put one of these spaces here. It will bump down this space, and then you're going to do level 3, at which point it'll fill in. You're going to keep that's not an outlaw. That's an outlaw, so this would go out here. But this, if you were to choose it instead, would go here. Once you hit this space, as it travels past it, you're then going to refill the cattle market. This, once it goes off the board, triggers the end of the game. Everybody gets one more round. Let's talk one more special area before we talk about buildings. So this would be the cattle market. Now, I'm going to drop the actual cattle down so you can see the actions. The way this works is you're going to spend. I say spend because it's more of it's a phrase that you're not really spending it, but you have a certain amount of cowboys in your disposal to use their abilities of. So if you were to only have the one painted on the board, you could spend $6 to get one of these level 3 cattle. Or over here, $12 to get a level 4. That's all you can do with one cowboy, unless you wanted to spend one to add 2 more cattle to the market. If you have 2 cowboys out here, which means you have one painted on the board and then one you've collected, one of these recruited into your space, you then can do a level 3 for 3 coins, or you can move down the line and see you can get a level 5 for 12. These are all worth victory points at the end of the game, which is why you want to collect these cattle, as well as they raise your value for selling cattle, which you're going to need money. So that's what the cattle market's all about. The last thing is building. Now this one's a little tricky because the way the building tile works for the actual space here is, this means sell green cattle to get 2 coins. You can build a building for as many builders as you have. So you have one printed on your board, so you could always build this one and the other 2 ones. And then you pay 2 coins times the amount of builders it takes. So if you're doing this one, it's $2. That's simple. If you're doing this one, it's 14. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. How would we build a 7? The other option you can do is you can tear down a building or renovate a building. You could put, let's say, this 7 that requires 7 builders on top of a 5 builders. Now, because the difference is 2, you only need to have 2 builders over here in your inventory because you get to count this 5 that's already on the board towards this 7. And that's the way it plays. The person with the most points at the end of the game wins the game over multiple rounds and multiple turns. It is variable because it all depends on maybe they choose not to move this track down as fast as they can. That's Great Western Trail 2nd edition. So that's second edition. First and foremost, it looks beautiful, right? It doesn't just look beautiful, it feels beautiful. The boards themselves are so nice, and that's the best word to describe them. They feel nice. The old version had those mats, and when you kick the board or knock the table or something, their discs would just fly off of it. Whereas now they're all inset and inlaid. Now Scythe was kind of the gold standard. We played that game pretty early on in our, diving into the hobby. Obviously we'd played for a long time, but diving in full board what we do now, it was one of those games back then that was so instrumental, and we thought, man, why can't every game have this? And then we played Great Western Trail shortly after that and thought, man, wouldn't it be great if they had those notches? Having that really, really makes the board so much more manageable and accessible to use. The board itself, the actual main board, looks gorgeous. And the only thing I'm going to knock the art direction for is sometimes in this version, for some reason, to me, it's harder to follow those arrows as quickly to the next building. So you could be building your entire turn based on not being able to see an arrow go correctly. So I know that's my fault more than the game, but just know I never had that problem in the original edition. Now, we're not judging this. Let me just say, this is not a first edition versus a second edition. I'm trying to do more standalone when it comes to the final thoughts, but I do want you to hear those certain critiques between it. I do like in the original how you would trade versus the outlaws, but I actually do really like the thematic notion of the outlaws, that you're actually hunting them down for a bounty. That makes more sense money-wise. But anyway, let's talk about the game and how it plays. The game itself has always been one of the best engine building games involving other mechanics. I've always used this as kind of the reference when I say, what other games do you like that have another mechanic involved inside of it? So, I think I even used that reference when I reviewed Lost Ruins of Arnak, when I said, what games do you like that have deck building not as the main mechanic? Because this one does it so well. You're building this deck of cows in one of the ways that you can score points. See, that's what's great about this game, is the point salad really works. You have multiple options, multiple strategies that can change based on what you do every single round. The only thing I'm really going to knock the game for is as the game progresses and you get more buildings out on the board, because you're building your engine to get better and better and better, the turns do start to stretch. Or I should say the rounds start to stretch. So in the first few rounds, you're going to hit Kansas City pretty quick, whereas in later rounds, it's going to take a little bit longer to hit those Kansas City spots because you've gotten so many more buildings out there. The consolation is you're not going to be hitting every one of those basic buildings anyway. What I do love about this game, and always have loved, is the deck building works so well to support the main engine building of the game. You have a point salad that you can go for cows to get points, you can go for buildings to get points, you can go for trains and station masters to get points. There's so many ways to do it, and all of them complement each other because you need money to do these other things. And that's what I love, is there are no resources in this game. It's cash and cows. Sounds like a Dave Ramsey reference. Cash is cows. Cash and cows, right? These two things alone are really the only things in the game that matter. I love the tweaks that this does. I love the new little cattle that it adds in the second edition versus the first edition. I love the physical upgrades to it. One thing I miss, though, is I really did like the Railways to the North expansion. And so this only takes just the, I want to say those discard tokens and things, a couple other things maybe from that, and adds it in, whereas it by itself was such a good expansion. I would have liked to have seen more of that exploring to the north. But again, for simplicity's sake, maybe that'll come in the spiritual sequels, or the sequels that are coming in, the next two of this being a trilogy. So if you like this game, try Maracaibo. If you like Maracaibo, definitely try this game. It is the best engine building, worker placement, movement style game that involves the mechanic of deck building. Now, I know that sounds like an MLB stat, right? That I just added a whole bunch of qualifiers. But if you break that down, it's one of the best engine builders. It's one of the best worker placement, worker movement games. It's definitely the best game when it comes to adding deck building into a main game. Huge fan of this. Can't say enough good things about it. Go out and get your hands on a copy of Great Western Trail. We've enjoyed this game for years and years, and we'll enjoy it for years to come. Great Western Trail, beautiful, phenomenal game. Brings me full circle to get to do a review of a game, second edition, that I did the first edition of when it came out. So, I'm Bryan Drake here on the Dice Tower. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Dice Tower Bryan. We'll see you soon.